Well, I'd like to welcome today from MemorialCare Saddleback Medical Center, Dr. Cheng-Han Chen. And Doctor, you are the medical director of the Structural Heart Program over at MemorialCare Saddleback Medical Center, and cardiologist as well. Welcome.
Thank you for
having me. Nice to have you here today. Let's first ask a little bit your background and what does it mean? You know, when I saw this, we've had lots of doctors on over the years, and I don't think I've ever seen the term structural heart.
Right.
So first tell us about yourself, and then what does that mean?
Sure. So let's see. My background is in engineering, actually. So
really?
Yeah. So I have a bachelor's, master's in material science and engineering from MIT. I have a PhD in bioengineering from UCLA, and I was actually a medical device engineer for many years. And then I decided I decided I wanted to be the person putting in the medical devices. So that's how I ended up in medicine. Let's see. I was medical school at UC San Diego and did some training at UCLA as well before I did more advanced training over at Columbia in New York City.
Okay.
So that's how I got into the structural heart field. And it's a structural heart disease really is a subspecialty of cardiology that deals with basically problems with the structure of the heart, such as with heart valves, heart walls, and heart muscle. Yeah. So this term wasn't really used that much until more recently, actually, when we realized that we could develop new minimally invasive techniques to actually treat a lot of these problems. So now that we could actually do something about it, we started using this term more and calling it structural heart disease and coming up with treatments for them.
That's very interesting. As I said, I've never heard of that term before, and years and years ago, I even worked at a place that came up with a minimal invasive device that was used. And many years ago, not that I'm a doctor, I was just like, you know, doing the recording, the database stuff. But I'd never heard that, so that's really interesting. So what are the most common symptoms and types of structural heart disease?
All right. So the most common type of structural heart disease that we deal with are typically problems with heart valves.
Okay.
So a lot of times we use structural heart disease synonymously with heart valve disease. But it's not just heart valves, it could be holes between different parts of the heart, so a hole in the wall of the heart. There's certain conditions where we call them septal defects.
Okay.
There's also even trouble with the heart muscle itself. Like sometimes you can have conditions where your heart muscle is too thick, and that is a problem with the structure of the heart. So in terms of the heart valve disease, this is a very common problem in cardiology. You typically you need your valves in the heart to open properly and close properly for the heart to function effectively. And so you could have problems with the heart opening, the valve opening well.
Right.
That's called stenosis. So you may have heard different conditions. There's aortic valve stenosis, for instance, and that's a very common structural heart problem. There's also problems with heart valves closing, and that's called regurgitation. And so there's a very common valve closing problem called mitral valve regurgitation, in which the doors of the valve don't close properly, don't meet together, so they'll leak. So there's heart valve problems, opening and closing, and also just holes in the heart, also other things that we try to treat.
Okay, let's talk about the risk factors or why this happens. Is it something that perhaps could be a heart defect you're born with?
Yeah.
Hereditary, just lifestyle?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as you can imagine, there's actually a wide spectrum of these type of diseases. Many of these problems are congenital, so you're born with them. For instance, holes in your heart. I've heard of people, many times babies are just born with holes in their heart. Frequently they get repaired when they're a baby, but sometimes they're okay until they get older and they're adult, and then the problem acts up and they say, okay, well now we got to fix this. So yes, some of these are congenital, which means they're born with it and you can't really prevent that from happening, you're just born with it. And certain other conditions are kind of just through normal wear and tear through them as you get older. For instance, the aortic stenosis, let's say, it's narrowing of that aortic valve that basically happens as you get older. And it happens through just calcium buildup and other fibrosis of the leaflets of the valve. And there's really nothing, we've done a lot of study in the medical field on what we can do, what kind of factors would promote development of this aortic stenosis, what things we can do to prevent it from happening. And it turns out there's not actually not much that we can do. It just happens.
Just happens, okay.
Yeah, some people just get it. And a lot of people just get it, we just have to deal with it.
Okay,
yeah.
All right. So it's not as though, obviously, with many kinds of different heart diseases,
yes,
it's certainly your lifestyle that could be a big factor. But it sounds like this, you could be the healthiest person around, and yet you still could develop this.
Exactly. I mean, we really wish there was a pill that we could take to give someone, or some sort of lifestyle modification. We can say, oh, just go exercise more and you won't get this. It turns out that it doesn't work for this particular problem or these particular problems. Yeah.
Are there symptoms involved, like perhaps, I would think being short of breath or winded?
Exactly.
Something like that?
So the specific symptoms someone gets from structural heart disease depends really on which particular problem you have.
Okay.
But in general, you're right, shortness of breath, fatigue, very common, sometimes chest pain or pressure, lightheadedness or dizziness. Sometimes you can see high blood pressure, or even stroke could be a presenting symptom. Worst case scenario, sometimes people just have sudden death from this problem and you just don't even know.
Wow,
yeah.
Wow. So the symptoms could be, it sounds like in some cases that some of the symptoms could be indications of many, many different things, right? I've got shortness of breath, I've got, you're a little overweight or something like that. The medical field, as you first look for, that old saying, you hear hoofbeats, you don't think zebras, you think horses, because obviously you're going to go through the easiest steps first. So how does it get to the point where one or your primary care doctor starts to think maybe this is something more, and they get to you? Right.
So making a diagnosis depends on many factors, and there's many things you need to do. So it starts off with basically talking to the patient and getting a sense of the symptoms.
Okay.
You start with the symptoms, and you start, like you said, kind of start thinking in your head what things they could be. There's a physical examination, so we can learn a lot just by examining someone, listening to their heart, getting a sense. A lot of these valve problems actually make different sounds, different murmurs. So you've heard of people having cardiac murmurs, and those very frequently come from heart valve problems. We frequently need to use imaging techniques. So there's ultrasound of the heart called echocardiogram. We can show us a lot about how the function of the heart is, what the structure of the heart is. We sometimes may need to use a CAT scan to get a better sense of how the heart is structured, and sometimes even a cardiac MRI, a heart MRI, to look at the heart. Yeah, so there are a lot of techniques that we kind of put together and then to make a good diagnosis. A lot of times, like you said, it really depends on someone kind of knowing themselves, realizing that something is not right, going to the primary care doctor, and the primary care doctor having a good examination and a good conversation with the patient to kind of know when is the right time to be referred to a cardiologist. Okay, and I think that's kind of the key, is having a good primary that's going to catch these things. Yeah. Okay. Now, obviously there's different treatments, because you just explained different types of things that could be happening. If it's heart valve, you go and you replace the valve, right? That's right. Right. So the most exciting part of this field of structural heart disease is the fact that over the last 10 years, we developed many, many new minimally invasive techniques for treating these diseases. For instance, let's talk about aortic stenosis. For someone with severe aortic stenosis, up until 10, 15 years ago, really the only option that they had was open heart surgery. So you can imagine that is a big deal. It is a major surgery, involves risk, and a lot of times patients are just too old or too sick or just too high risk to undergo a surgery. Okay. So we now have a technique called TAVR here at Saddleback. It is a minimally invasive aortic valve replacement. We can go through a small access tube through the groin and be able to replace someone's aortic valve simply through going through the leg without having to go through opening up the chest. Instead of staying in the hospital for up to a week and recovering very slowly at home for 1 or 2 months, our patients now can get back on their feet later the same day and go home the next day. Yeah, that's incredible. That's what people want. They want to be able to go in and have anything done fairly quickly. What about the recovery time on that? Right. So as I mentioned, you can go home the next day from a TAVR procedure as long as everything, you're doing well, and then you're basically back to what normal is for you in basically 1 or 2 days.
Yeah.
Rather than being in the hospital the whole week.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Now, we talked about, unfortunately, in many cases, there's no way to prevent this. And so there's just not much you can do, even if you have a good, healthy lifestyle, you exercise all the time. And
yes, that's the unfortunate part. As we talked about earlier, there's nothing we can really do. So the most important thing is really knowing yourself, making the diagnosis, and then coming up with a good treatment plan with your primary care doctor and your cardiologist.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's exciting that these type of things can be fixed, repaired, taken care of without being overly invasive, and the fact that the patient is out in such a quick amount of time is fantastic.
Yeah. No, definitely. That's like I said. This TAVR is just one of the many new minimally invasive techniques we now have at Saddleback. We can fix holes in the heart just through the groin. We can even put plugs in the different parts of the heart that can actually help prevent strokes in certain kind of cardiac conditions, such as atrial fibrillation, without the use of a blood thinner. So there's a whole range of new techniques we have now, basically, that just came online in the medical field just in the last 5 years.
Yeah,
really.
Fantastic. Doctor, thank you very much
thank you for having
on.
me here.
It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Here.
And if you'd like more information, you can go to memorialcare.org/SB Heart and get more information there. And as you can see, they've got some great staff over there and with great backgrounds. And the primary thing is see your primary, right?
That's right.
All right, primary thing, see
Absolutely.
your primary. All right, good to meet you. We'll be right back.